Okay, you've got Jerry's nose in the picture.
Okay.
That's completely fine.
That's all right.
Okay. So, do you know what the date is today?
The second, did you look at, was it the second day of May?
The second day of May. And do you know what the year it is?
2007.
Are you sure?
Yes, I'm definitely sure.
I've heard that we should never ask that question.
Oh, really?
Okay. Please tell us who you are, your
Okay.
full name.
My full name, right from my maiden name also. I
Yeah.
guess, all right, my name is Lola Aurelia Teresa Buyas Barnes Cornell.
And how old are you today?
I am 84.
84?
Yes.
Right. I keep forgetting that you're
Yes.
84, not 83.
Yes, well, that's all right, I don't mind.
Okay, and your date of birth?
November the 20th, 1922.
And where were you born?
In just outside of Poznań, Poland.
And where's the large city, Nick?
That is a large city.
How do you say it?
Poznań.
Poznań.
It's in the northwestern part of Poland.
Okay. And can you please tell us your mother's name
My mother's name was Teresa Kotarba.
and your father's?
My father's name was Joseph Buyas.
Okay. And do you know where your mother's mother, your grandmother, can you tell us about your grandparents at all?
Yes, my grandfather's name was Wojciech Kotarba, and my grandmother's name was, I think it was Elżbieta, I'm not sure. And I have an aunt. Do you want any more?
Yeah.
I have an aunt named Jadwiga, my mother's younger sister, who was about 5 or 6 years younger than she was. And I have my mother's brothers, Stanisław and Leon.
Leon.
Leon. And one was my mother's older brother, and Leon was her young brother.
How do you say that?
Leon.
Leon. How
That's
about
like Lionel.
It is close. How about and so then your mother's side of the family came from what countries?
From Poland, Świątniki Górne. That's the name of the town, or it was a village. It's right outside of Kraków, and that's where they settled in about the late 1400s.
What did they do there?
Well, you mean now in this? No,
No.
you mean at that time.
Mm-hmm.
Well, the Queen Jadwiga married the Polish king, and they came with her sort of entourage, and they were her armor makers. So they were given this part of the country. It's on a hill above Kraków, because the palace is in Kraków. That's where the seat of the kings was, and they were given this, so they've all lived there. So practically the whole town, there's a lot of intermarriage. Part of the whole town is Kotarba. When you go to the cemetery, that's all you see.
How do you spell that?
Kotarba.
Okay, that's good to know. So have you visited there?
Yes, several times.
And so you've been to the graveyard too?
Yes, I have.
Did Mom go with you?
I believe she did, yes.
Okay.
Over there, yes. That would have been the place we went.
Yeah. So we'd go to what town and then?
Świątniki Górne. That means the Blessed Hills. That's the actual translation.
And it's near Krakow.
It's above, you can see Kraków when you look down. It's just above Kraków. It's about 10, 15 miles outside of Kraków.
And what about your father's father?
My father's father, I don't know his name.
Did you meet him?
No, he died long before I was born. He was very old. When he died, he was over 100. 100 years old.
Your father.
My father's father.
Oh. And how did he die?
He just died of old age. He was over 100. But he was still very vibrant to the very end. He still rode on his horses and tried to get married again. So he was really a pirate. He was I'll tell you the rest of that when we get more into it.
No, we can go now.
Oh, well, when he was just a small child, he had, I think, 1 or 2 sisters, but he was the only boy. Both his parents died. So he was left in his older sister's care, and he would inherit the property that they had when he came of age. So during that time, his sister had married. She had a husband and her own family, and he had to really look out for himself because his brother-in-law tried to get rid of him several times because then they would inherit what was there. So when he growing up, he grew up to be very tough and very wily. So when he reached the age that he inherited all the, which was a lot of property because my sister-in-law was showing me, it covered the whole valley as you look down. When he inherited that, he put them out and took over and brought the property up to the standards he wanted. And then he went into Krakow and found himself a fairly wealthy wife with a huge dowry and sent her back. He married her and brought her back, and she was my grandmother.
Do you know her name?
No, I don't. I just heard talking about them, but they never mentioned names. But she died when my mother married my father. His mother lived just for another week, and then she died. So my mother had to take over as being the head of the household. So at 19, she was 19.
And then your grandfather, he lived on with them.
Well, what he did when he reached a certain age, he settled the property between his three sons. He had a daughter, but she died. But she had been given a large dowry when she married. So there were just the three boys, but my father's brothers were about 20 years at least older than he, the youngest one, because his younger brother was the same age as his father's father-in-law. So I can just get the age difference there. So my grandfather settled the property evenly between the three boys. He gave them each their own inheritance, but on the condition that they would look after him. And so he used to go from, say, spend a certain number of months in one household and sort of migrated until he died.
So do you know your father's brothers?
No.
And what was your father's name?
Joseph.
Joseph. And
he was the younger one, so he was really alone with his mother was a very gentle, pious woman, whereas his father hated her. His mother was very, very devout, and she gave a lot of money to the church, but she had to do it when his father was out, because if the priest was there when her husband came, he would probably shoot him.
Could you tell me your father's full name again?
Joseph Buyas. Joseph Buyas.
And he had brothers too?
Yes.
Their names, do you know them?
No, that's what I say, I don't know them.
No.
You see, my father very rarely discussed his family. And they were away from home, He did know them well because they really looked, they helped look after him, really, when he was sent away to school, to Krakow, because they only had elementary school there. And if they went to high school, they were sent to Krakow, which is the city right near them. So when he was sent to Krakow to live there and go to school, he laughed because he said he was, he had money, and his father would send him there, and he'd come and visit him and give him money to spend. His brothers would come and give them money to spend. So he just didn't go to school at all, he just had a good time.
What do you think he had a good time at?
Well, he didn't say, but he always enjoyed good company, good liquor, so he always enjoyed that, always, all his life. So then when his father came and found out that he wasn't even attending school as much as he should, he took him back home, and to punish him, he had sent him to a shoemaker to learn how to make shoes. He said this was the lowest trade he could ever learn, and that's all he was good for. So my father said at least one thing he had that came in handy, but that was about it.
How did he meet your mom?
Oh, they lived in adjacent towns, and my grandfather knew her father, but actually they were they got together not with her father so much, but with all the people there are sort of related, in that area. So he knew my future sister-in-law's father. So the two of them used to get together, you know, and drink or something, or keep. And they decided that my mother and his son would make a good pair. So they just didn't. They match-made them. My mother knew him because she said he used to. My father always had a really beautiful horse, and they used to send away for fabric, you know, for his clothes to be made of just the English fabric, because that was the best for riding. So she would see him coming to town, you know, and he always loved Arabian horses, on his Arabian horse, and you know, she thought he was rather nice.
Do you know can you tell me what he looked like? Can you describe how tall he was, or?
Well, he was about, I guess, about 5'8", and rather very slender, quite slender. And he had very dark hair, and he was a nice looking man, and very charming. You know, he used to be able to, I mean, he was very likable. Everybody liked him. So he would drive, you know, ride in on his horse, and sort of, he really didn't have much to do with anybody, because he was usually kept pretty well by himself.
He was a lone wolf.
No, it's just that there weren't enough people around that they wanted him to associate with, you know, around him where he lived. So he was saying that he had one friend, and that you know, they went to school, and he'd have to come home and stay there and not go out with all the other adults. So I guess his mother sort of babied him. So so they just met, and somebody was telling me, because my mother's family were a very, very good family, but his father had died when they were quite young, and his mother remarried, and the man she married was an alcoholic. He just drank everything away that they had. So they didn't have very much as far as money was concerned, but they had prestige because they were a very good family. My mother didn't have a huge dowry, because my sister-in-law was telling me something about that the haggling was over the dowry that she had. And I don't think she had very much, but that was all right, because she had other attributes.
What did she look like? I'm sorry for interrupting.
Well, from what they say, she was the most beautiful girl in the town. She was, at that time when my father met her, she was very, he said he could put his hands around her waist. She was very slender. And she was about 5'3", 5'4".
Your mom?
Mm-hmm. Very, very dark hair. And her eyebrows were, you know, her eyebrows were like wings. And I always remember her being fairly heavy, but she would never grow up. She was really, you know, well groomed, and the thing, my father was a leg man. Isn't that strange? I know that from listening to him and your other grandfather. Or, yes, would it be your great grandfather? Yes, it would be your great grandfather talking. They were talking about the different women that they liked and their attributes that they liked.
Now tell me, which great grandfather of mine?
On your mother's father's side. My father and your grandfather's father used to get together all the time.
What was his name?
His name was, let's see, what was his first name?
This is my dad's grandfather?
Joseph, yes, Joseph Balansky. They came from Odessa.
Oh, this is your husband's?
Yes, your mother's father.
Okay.
His father, like your great-grandfather.
Oh, so your husband's dad.
Yes. And my father.
Oh, great.
They became great friends, because your grandfather's father didn't associate too much with other Poles. They came, and he and my father they used to visit each other every week.
Oh, nice.
They became very good friends. And they would sit, you know, when your great-grandfather on your grandfather's side would come, he'd bring a bottle of wine, and my father would have a bottle of wine, and they'd sit there and have something to eat that they would have, and they would sit. They'd chat all the time about all sorts of things, because they had, they tell each other their stories and what they did. Because my father came, when they were young, Poland was divided into 3 sections. One section was was part of Germany, one section was part of Austria, and one section was part of Russia. So the part that, like your grandfather on your great-grandfather on your grandfather's side his family came from Warsaw. And my father's family came from Krakow, which were, so the Warsaw was under Russia and Krakow was under Austria. So they had different experiences, because my father, this is all sort of going away from what we're talking about, but it's just history, really. My father had to join the Austrian army when the First World War broke out. And your grandfather's father, his family, he came from Warsaw, but they were under Russia, so they would have had conscription in Russia. So they would conscript all the young men, and they would have to go to Russia to join the Russian army as a conscript. When they conscripted them, they weren't really in the actual army itself. They would, and he was in the orchestra. He played the French horn. So your great-grandmother, her family lived in Odessa, which is in Russia. It was part of Russia at that time, on the Black Sea.
Is it Stanley's mother?
Yes, they were Poles, and there weren't many Polish families there, but her father had something to do with the railroad. So they had to live in Russia, in Odessa, and she had 2 sisters. So when they heard, there were so few Polish families there, when they heard there was a Pole that they would like to meet in the orchestra, well, then they invited him for dinner. And that's how the 2 of them met, and they married. But he was still there. I'll get it. Jadwiga, her name was Jadwiga. Jadwiga Karaszinska. That was her last name, her maiden name.
Beautiful.
Karaszinska, yes. And she had a sister named Julia. And they were beautiful. They had a photograph of the wedding, in these round frames they used to have. I don't know what happened to them, because they were in my sister-in-law's care, and I don't know what she did. But they met there, and they married. And then he was still there serving with the Russian army when they were going to they were going to go to war with Japan. So knowing this, and they had, at that time, they had 2 children. They had Leon and Nora. The 2 children were born at that time. So he didn't want to stay there, so that they migrated to Canada. And that's how they arrived in Canada. So nevertheless, getting back to your 2 great-grandfathers, they had a lot of things that they liked to discuss, because they had the same type of background, in their families and everything. Because he still has, your great-grandfather still had a sister who lived in Warsaw, even just up to after the Second World War. I remember her because Nora wanted me to write to her at that time. I think my brother knew of her because her husband was a judge, I think, in Warsaw. Anyway, that's getting off the point. That's all I know about that part. So they had a great deal to talk about, and as I say, my father admired legs on women. You should have heard the two. They were never obscene or anything like that. They would they'd come dressed, and they would, my dear sir, and you don't know how Polish people are. They're very, very polite. They are. Even when they've known each other quite a long time, they very rarely use first names. They do eventually, but you have to be very, very close. So they would discuss all these things, the two of them. And so my father was saying that he was attracted to my mother's legs more than anything. Isn't that strange? But he thought she was. But my mother was considered quite a beauty at that time.
So there was Nora and Stanley
And Julia. Oh, they were in his family. There was his brother Leon, who was the eldest, Leon, and then there was Sidney, that was the second, and then Edward, the third, and Julia was in there. I think there was Leon, and then Nora in age, and then Julia, and then Sidney, and then who was after him? I guess it was Edward, and then your grandfather, Stanley, and his young sister, Victoria.
And among of those, who was he closest to?
To his eldest brother. Because he was, it's difficult to explain to people like you and I, but at that time, fathers weren't terribly involved in raising their children. I know my father didn't pick any of us up until they were about 2, and nice and clean, that sort of thing. They never had much to do with a small child, except to say hello and hot dog. So with his father, Stan was the second youngest by that time, and he didn't have the same interests as his father had. So they never spoke to each other. He doesn't remember having a conversation with his father at any time.
Yusuf.
Yeah. So that's what I mean, they were very distant. He was there, he supported them, but that was it. So he didn't really get to know his father that well until he came back from prison camp. And then he became too, and he didn't, your grandfather didn't hold it against his father. He said, well, all these things happen, he said, you have to live your own life, and there's no use worrying about what happened prior to that. So that's the way he felt about it at the time.
Brought Leon and...
But Leon was his eldest brother, and he used to call your grandfather Moses, like Moses discovered the bulrushes, because he was a neglected one. He sort of had to fare for himself. His mother really raised the girls, and his father was really supposed to look after the boys.
What was his mother's name?
Jadwiga Karaszinska. Yes, that was her maiden name. She had a beautiful voice. She used to sing in all the operettas, that they had in the Polish group. She would be the soprano who sang. As a matter of fact, this is just getting back, but your grandfather used to say that she bought a car for his eldest brother so he could take them around and drive them where she wanted to go. So they would all pack in this car, and she would sing. And your grandfather hated opera because that's all she sang. And he would just sit there, and he loved music. But she would just sing, all of these areas from opera, just about drove him up a wall.
And how did you meet Stanley?
Actually, we all belonged. He was really a tough fellow. He was running around, quite a tough crowd. And he'd go out every night, things of that sort. When he was 18, 19, 20. And his brother Sidney, we all belonged to a Polish organization. My mother used to be the secretary, treasurer of the women's group, and her friend was the president, over all this time. So we all belonged to this Polish group because they used to put on plays every week. There was something going on. We went to Polish school there. And his brother Sidney was the president of the youth group. He was the older. He was very, very serious. He was a very serious young man. And so he practically hog-tied him to come to this youth group. His mother was concerned about his getting in with the wrong company. So Sidney got him to come. So once he came, he started to attend all the time. He enjoyed himself. So that's how I met him there. He was 20 and I was 16. And when I met him, after I met him, I said, I'm going to marry you when I grow up. So of course he kept his distance. From, imagine me. I just said, I'm going to marry you when I grow up.
That's nice.
So, but he was, he stayed, you know, he really came on to all the meetings and all the things that we had. Where they had dances there all the time. We used to have a band in.
And when you went for a date, your first date, what
I was
did you
18.
do you remember what you did or what you liked to do together?
Oh, we still like dancing. We loved dancing.
What kind
And
of
he was
dances?
a wonderful dancer. Pardon?
What kind of dances did you do?
Oh, that
Jitterbug?
jitterbugging. Oh, yes. Oh, I could dance other dances too because in the Polish custom you have to learn how to do all the waltz. We learned all. As a matter of fact, every time we went to a dance, his father waltzed beautifully. He was really, so he always asked me to dance. The two of us would dance.
But you and Stanley did the jitterbug?
Oh, sure.
And
He
what
was
else?
a great dancer.
Charleston?
Oh, wait, no, Charleston wasn't that. No, that was in the 20s. That was long. No, it was all. And slow dancing. You know, we had a lot of slow dances too, jitterbugging. I mean, it wasn't
Jitterbug
all together.
fast?
Oh, sure.
Very, very fast. You
Oh.
sweat.
Oh, yes. Oh, no.
Not you, but other people.
Oh, sure. Yeah. So we used to go to all the dances together.
Right.
You know. And, you know, go out with groups, and we all went to different, we had wiener rolls and corn rolls. We had a lot of things going on all the time. Yeah. So then he was drafted when the war broke out. They had a draft just to sort of train them a little. They weren't actually called up to be whatever they were going to go into. So he went away for, I think, something like a few months. They had to serve for a while. And then when he came back, I guess it was about I was 18, and we were engaged. And then I was 19, we were married. Mm-hmm. And during that time, he joined the Air Force and had to go for basic training, and then he had to go to flight school because he was chosen to be a fighter pilot. And they were that was really an honor to be chosen for that, because you had to be really, really fast, had to think fast, you had to react fast. I mean, it was really, they called them the glamour boys and they were, because they were all outstanding. So then when he got his wings, he left practically right after that. We were married, and then he left.
So did you get pregnant when he left?
Well,
Before he left?
Yes.
Before he left?
Yeah.
And so you had Mom when he was gone?
When I was alone.
And she didn't see him until she was 2, right?
Mm-hmm. She was 2 in April, and he came back in July.
Okay.
She just she had seen pictures of him, when we went to greet him, she just sort of sat there and looked at him like that. You know, she was very serious. She never just, gurgled like this. She sort of sized people up. And he put him on her. He was afraid of her, because he said, you could just take her little hand and break it, because it hurt. She was very delicate. And so she was sitting there, and she just was sort of looking at him.
And when he was away, he was shot down, right?
Yeah.
Shot down?
Yeah. In October, was it October? Around that. And it wasn't until, I guess, the end of November that I found out that he was alive.
And he was in prison camp in Russia?
Not at that time when I got, no, he wasn't. He was in Germany, prison camp in Germany. No, when he was shot down, I got a message saying that he was presumed dead. Just cut off from
there. Okay, so we were going to go back to when you were moving from Poland with your mom.
Prior to that.
Okay.
Because you have to have the reason of why, to know why.
Okay.
All right, let's say after my father came back. Have you started?
No.
Well, we'll take it back to when my father came back from this First World War, because that sort of continues very quickly through there, to why did we immigrate to Canada.
Okay, so he was eventually conscripted?
This was your grandfather, great-grandfather's father was. He didn't want to be conscripted, that's why he left, but my father was in the Austrian army.
Oh, I don't think we went into that last time.
Oh, okay.
Okay, why don't we start?
Yes, yes, we have, my mother and father were married.
Okay, hold on. Okay, let's start with the marriage of your parents then.
Yes.
Okay.
Got it,
You weren't there for that.
but I know
Okay.
about it. They let me know. Are we starting?
You'd be really special if you did know.
Yes, wouldn't it?
Okay, so go.
Yes, so my parents were married, and shortly after their wedding, weddings in Poland last a long time.
No way.
Oh, yes. I mean, they have a big affair, and then the young couple is practically, doesn't do very much for about a year. They sort of celebrate their marriage. But with my mother's and father's case, she went to his home. She was taken there as a bride, and her mother-in-law died within a week. So she was left to look after the whole place herself. They had a stable boy, and they had a woman who worked in the kitchen and all that, so that wasn't that part. But she had to arrange everything at age 19, which was a lot. So then she seemed to be fine, it went well, and then she had her first child about 2 years after, and he was stillborn, so that was a bit. And then my brother Stan was born about 2 years after that. And then I had a sister, Zosha, who was born about 2 years after my brother Stan. And when she was 3, when my father was conscripted into the Austrian army because their part of the country was under Austria. So he had to go to war, and he was away at the front for 2.5 years without coming back at all. So my mother before he went, I told you my grandfather was a dreadful man. So before my father went, he got a great big strapping woman to help my mother and look after her while he was away. So the two of them really had to run the place because there weren't any men around. They were all at war. So my mother became quite ill. She had some sort of a heart seizure, and she was ill for a while. But she recovered at that time. She strained her heart, that was it. And after my father came back, she was fine. And then the Spanish flu came all across the continent. You might have read about that. It just decimated part of Europe. And there was at least one death in each family at that time. So everybody was ill. My mother got it, and my sister got it, she was just 5, and she died. And then my mother had been unconscious during that time because when she found out, but she wouldn't believe my father when he told her that. So he said she used to wander around the house looking for her. It was a really bad thing. And then they stayed there for a while, and then my father had sort of itchy feet. He wanted to see the world. He didn't want to stay in that part. So he sold his property, and he had quite a bit of money left from his mother because his mother had certain parts of what they made for her own use. And he being the youngest, she gave that to him when she died. So he found a place in one part of Poland near Poznań. He liked it up there. So he bought this. First of all, he bought a store. And so my mother ran it because he was always off somewhere. And they were there for about 2 years. Let's see, I guess my brother Chester was born at that time. And every time one of the children was born, my young aunt Jadwiga, who was my mother's younger sister, would come and stay with her for a while and help her. And then after about 2 years, they moved to another place. My father got tired of the store, and they bought another property of some kind. So about every 2 years, one of the children would be born, and they'd move somewhere else. And you just buy something, you get tired of it, and you go on. And the third time, because Stan remembers this. He loved this place. They bought a great big farm with a river and everything through. My brother was telling me about it when I was there. So that lasted for a little while, and my father got tired of that. So then they bought a coal firm and an apartment in a place just outside of Polsenheim. And that was just at the part when the Great Depression went across all of Europe. And the money was devalued so that the money that they had wasn't worth anything. My father said in order to pay the caretaker of the apartment that they had, it cost him more than he got from all the rents. And then the coal business, his partner in that, his wife was liked to spend a lot of money, and he sort of embezzled some of the money out of that. And I'm sure it was because my father wasn't really paying that much attention to it. So they had to get rid of that. So that was it. I mean, my father just sold everything and decided to go to America.
What was your father like? He sounds like such a character. I can't even get a serious picture of
he
him.
would go out, my mother said, they had like a large farm, so he would go out just to see how the men were working, how they were doing. And he'd go out on his horse, ride across, and he'd come back the next day. He'd probably, meet a few companions, and he'd go and have a good night, and then he'd come back the next day. Or he'd go out to an auction, he'd come back with a piano. Nobody played, but he'd come back with a piano. Things like that. So he was just a very easygoing. He always had money that he didn't have to worry about it. And so he just had a good life. And he looked after my mother. One thing, she had problems with her feet. So he went and had special shoes made for her so that, so they would fit properly. So things like that. And my mother, when she had, I was going to kindergarten, not kindergarten, but like a nursery. My eldest brother would take me there. And when they had to get the children ready for school, she'd have a seamstress come in and do all the, make all the clothes for them and that. So she was looked after well, but she was always the one that sort of had to take over.
Do you have any memory of the two of them in the same room?
Oh, they were very close. Yes, very close. He was really, to the end of their days, they were very close. I remember when my mother would go to a meeting or so, he would walk her down and then he would go meet her and walk her back again. And they were always very close, apart from him wandering off. But they had a very close relationship, always. But he liked a nice, good time.
What do you mean by that?
I don't mean with women or anything, but he liked to go out and sit, at a what was that? Sit outside, at a not a saloon, but they had these coffee houses, and they'd sit out there and talk and drink. And he had a lot of friends. My mother said one town she would go to church in the morning so that she would be home to make dinner and look after him. And he would go to the later mass. So he had there was a judge who was there and somebody else, there were about four of them. And they'd go and have a beer after that, and they'd sit out in the courtyard or somewhere and come home, She never knew when he'd come home.
And when you said there was a seamstress, what did you wear when you were little?
Well, I had a picture of me. They were nice clothes, very nicely made. And my brothers wore, so you had to wear suits to school. They had to wear a certain type of thing that they wore to school. They just didn't wear any.
Was it uniform?
No, but they had to be, they had to have, I have the picture of them. They had to wear a nice shirt and top, and we had to dress nicely, and she made my mother's clothes too. As a matter of fact, when we came here, my mother had some really nice clothes, but she wouldn't buy anything until the Depression was over, when she'd go into a tailor and have a coat made, things like that. So they were nice clothes. And my sister-in-law, Helen, remembers me when we came there, because her mother had a store just down the corner from where we went when we first came from Poland. And my mother and I would go into the store to buy something, and she remembers me coming in. She said she remembers this little blue velvet coat I had with a fur collar, you know, and a little hat. And, you know, they all remember me. I was 6 then. So,
Do you remember the ride over or anything like that?
yes, I do, because, well, as I say, my father came here to Canada, and in order to come to emigrate, they had to, they were sent out to, so they wouldn't allow just to come anyway at that time, because it was just after the war. So they had to go out to the west, and they had to go to work on farms. And my father said, they went there, and I could just picture him, because he was always really well dressed, you know, with they had spats, you know, and all these, and a cane. He always had a cane, and when he smoked, he had a cigarette holder. He never just had the cigarette in his mouth. And he wasn't foppish or anything. This is just the way he did. So he said they went out there, and he said this big farm woman came in early in the morning. And in Poland, when he didn't have breakfast, he'd have coffee or something. Then he'd go out, and then he'd come back and have, you know, coffee and something at that time. He said she came in, and she put all these huge slabs of food on the table, and she was sloppy, and he couldn't stand any of it. It was like that. And he said they lasted, he and a friend, it just lasted a long time. And then they just got on a train and went to Toronto. They didn't stay. And then, of course, he got a job. He'd never worked anywhere, so he didn't really know. So he got, and in a poll coming here, we don't know, but they couldn't get really good jobs because they couldn't speak the language, and they all considered them immigrants. So he got a job in a factory, and then the Depression hit, and everybody was fired. And in the Depression, if you had a name that was foreign, they wouldn't hire you. There were so few jobs left that they only hired people who were of British extraction. So there were millions of people just wandering the streets during that time. But I'm getting away from myself. Yes, we took we went after my father left. My mother, he left her some money to keep her going, and somehow it got burned by accident or what. So she took my brother Stan was going to high school at that time. So he stayed there to attend school, and the rest of us, my brother Marion, Chester, and my brother Joe and I, went to my grandparents, and we lived there for 2 years. My brother Stan would come during the holidays and stay with us, but otherwise he was away at school. And so my mother was waiting for my father to send for her, and he wasn't, so she finally, 2 years was enough. So she finally, practically, I don't know how, she told him he would just have to have us come over. So he sent her a ticket for her and the 2 younger ones. And the 2 older ones stayed with my grandparents. And my brother Stan was away. And my mother was going to send for us. So we went on the ocean, I don't remember the liner that we were on, but I do remember my mother was ill. She was seasick the whole voyage. So there was a young man about her age who had gone to Poland on a visit. He lived in the States, and they became friends. So he looked after us during the whole trip. He'd take us out, you know, to eat. He'd take us on board, and while my mother was ill all that time. So then we got to Canada. I don't remember where. We must have landed in Halifax and came to Toronto. And my father had found a place, a flat or something for us to live. And I remember this because he took us to meet all the friends that he had associated with. So that lasted about a week. And then my mother just put her foot down, and she said, "You have to just do something else." So we actually started a family. She found a house that we could go to, so we lived in the ground floor, and there were people upstairs. And then we were just getting settled when the Depression struck there. And my father lost his job. I remember my mother, she really got sick because there was nobody she could turn to. And she was really depressed for about a year. And I remember because she was
She was worried sick.
oh, I mean, there was nobody, and she was too proud to take help from anybody. I mean, this was unthinkable. So, because there were a lot of people, you know, just went to the churches and they all helped them, and she just tried to make do. So then finally, she did. They had help from the government for people, so she did take help as far as paying for the rent. But then she got a house and she rented the other place so that it could pay for our meals and everything that she could find and do. So they used to do all sorts of things. She would get wallpapering. She'd find someone, and my father would go. She didn't know anything about it, but she'd get him, and they'd go out wallpapering over, and somebody. She heard somebody had I remember her sewing things, that somebody would come in and she would, so she just made do with all these things that she could.
She made everything, you said. All your food, all your noodles.
Oh, everything. Oh, well, she always had, you know, this, I mean, she knew how to do everything about home, because she had to run a home for such a long time. And she knew how you could make cold meat, you know, how you could make all sorts of things. So she could do it. I mean, she didn't do those here, but she could do all of that. And they used to make sauerkraut, you know, in the basement, in barrels. And then when
That's cool.
yeah, it was. And she and my father, he'd go to the market and get the cabbages and things and bring them back. And he'd go to market, the St. Lawrence Market, and bring fruit back that she would preserve. They were all, I mean, my mother used to do all of that. We had all that preserved for the winter, because she believed that children should have lots of vegetables, lots of milk, lots of butter, you know, all the things. And then she used to bake. She didn't bake bread. She did for the weekend, but that was it. But she made all her own macaroni, you know, everything. It was really, and she was very meticulous. I mean, she used to scrub the floor in the kitchen every day so that it was clean. I remember coming home from school, there would be papers on the floor because she had just washed it and dried. So yes, she was very hardworking. And then she also read. She loved reading. So she always, every night she read to us from the Polish classics that she knew she would read. And she couldn't, one thing they did, which talking about what we did at that time, she joined the Polish Union, and she was very active in that. And her friend, Mrs. Stanszewski, they were in the auxiliary, the women's auxiliary, that, and she was the president. My mother was always the secretary treasurer. So there wasn't any library or anything when they first came here. So she had my brother send books from Poland, my brother Stan, and they got books from everybody, and they opened a small library, and he had that in the community hall. And they were she was very active in visiting women who were ill. And we all went to church, but she didn't have any other part. She was never socially active in church. We just went to church for the religion.
Did she have girlfriends, or did she have time for that?
Oh, she had a lot of women friends in the auxiliary, and Mrs. Stanszewski was her very dear friend, the two. She was, I must tell you about her too. She was born in the States, in New York State. And then when she was of marriageable age, her parents took her to Poland to find the suitor in Angela. She couldn't find anyone there. So she went to Poland and was betrothed there and married, and came back to Canada. And so she was very fluent in English. I mean, she was brought up in that, but she was also very active in the Polish community.
That was probably very helpful.
Yes, go ahead, continue. That was enough of that.
Do you think your mom had a great deal of effect on you as a person, and how do you think that she did?
Oh yeah, she never, I never remember her really trying to discipline me. It just came naturally. I would never think of being disrespectful, never would say anything to her that wouldn't, I would never argue with her. I mean, it was just the way you were brought up. Oh yeah, she had a great influence on me, indirectly, because I can see how brave she was and how, and I guess my brother Joe keeps saying that I was pampered, I wasn't spoiled, because I was the only girl. And you see, when I was born, after losing her daughter that way, I mean, I guess she just thought I was just everything, but she didn't spoil me. I still had to toe the line.
That's good.
Yeah, so no, that's true, yeah. So, but it's too bad, But I don't ever remember talking to my mother about anything or discussing anything. We didn't do that. You just sort of, osmosis, maybe, that's all, because she wasn't the sort of the person that I would go and, if I had to solve a problem, I'd do it myself. If something was bothering me, I wouldn't go to her and have her fix it for me, I'd do it. So I guess I learned to be self-sufficient that way.
And I know that she passed away shortly after you were married, or after Mom was born.
Well, she was very ill from the time I was about 16 with a very bad heart. And when your mother was born, she was in the hospital. My mother was dying because the doctor said she only had about 6 months to live then. So when your mother was born, April the 25th, and it was Mother's Day, and my mother was in the hospital. And while I was expecting, I used to visit her. She was at St. Joseph's just about every day. So I guess your mother must have been about 3 weeks old when my mother died. And it was Mother's Day, and I went to see her because I had just come back from the hospital. I was kept there for about 2 weeks because I was quite ill. And so when I got better, I went to see her, and on Mother's Day, and then she died about 2 days after.
Oh, how terrible. How terrible. And when you had Mom, Granddad was far away, and then he came back, and that's kind of where we were yesterday.
Yes, yeah.
We were talking about that, but let's go back first of all to your father. He lived very long.
Oh yes, he was 83 when he died, and he was still very well, but he had cataract on his eyes, so he went to have the cataracts removed, and that just caused I don't know whether it's a clot or an aneurysm. So it struck him, and he was paralyzed just on one side, and so he was taken to the hospital. He was there until he died. He didn't last. I know he probably just he was such a proud, active man that I think that alone killed him.
Yeah. But when going back now, when Stanley was at war, your father was very much around you and in the same community, wasn't he?
Well, yes. I lived with him. I lived there for a while there because my mother was in the hospital, so I stayed there and looked after my father and my brother because he was only 16 or so,
Joe.
17, yeah, Joe. And I didn't really look after him. I just, we lived together. And then when my mother died, I was there for a while, and it became intolerable with all the tension, with the death. Then I decided to go out on my own. So I just moved down the street a little way to a flat of my own. But he was just up the street, so I saw him. So yes, he was fine. I visited him. He babysat one. He didn't know how to look after a baby, but I remember she was quite small. I never went out because I didn't have anyone to leave her with. So I had to go somewhere, and he said, "Oh, he would." So I left him, and he smoked, and he burned her with an ash, and he was just devastated. But he was very active. Now he'd come over for dinner every Sunday or so, because he was. And then my father-in-law, the two of them would come over, and I'd have them for dinner in my flat. And the two of them sit, as I told you, they're very proper. The two of them were sitting there, talking, and they'd have this wine. I remember one time, my father-in-law, he got up, and he thought he was going out, and he walked into my broom closet. That was hilarious. Yes, they really, I mean, yes, I saw. And then my brother, he was in the sea cadets. He loved the sea. And all of it, during his teen years and all that, he was always, involved in the sea cadets, sailing. And then he was about 17, and he went out with a friend who got him drunk, and he didn't drink. And they went up and signed up for the army, the two of them.
So where did he go off to, Joe?
He went into the army after. But he was only about 17. He had to get permission from my father because he signed up, but then, he was underage, so he had to come and have my father sign the papers on it. So he went into the army. He was in the Signal Corps. So that's where he went. I couldn't believe it, because if he ever went into anything, I'm sure it was going to be the Navy, because he just loved that. So that's how he met Wilma, where he was stationed there.
Where?
Well, he met her. Now, did he meet her at home? I don't know. He met her somewhere through somebody that he knew. And he liked her because she was pretty heavy, and she would look after him. My father.
Terrible.
No.
That's a criteria.
He was only 19 when he was married, both of them. And my father, we were invited to the wedding. Of course we were, and they were. Your grandfather was back by then, and because the war was over, and we didn't know much about the family. We didn't think it was that great, but so we went to the wedding in Stony Creek. That's where she came from. And when my father, he said to this was terrible. He said to Joe, "How could you marry somebody with such awful legs?" And he said, "and such a terrible family." I'm glad he spoke Polish, because it was insulting. But they were nice people, but they were just really, so there we are. But it was a long time for me to get even accustomed to Wilma.
When your father finally came and you had your home and your mom and dad lived together with all of your children, would he come and go as much as he did in Poland?
No, not at all. No, he didn't do that at all. He was always, the Depression was there, they were always together. No, he didn't do that. He made his own wine, and he never got drunk. If he did have too much, he'd just go to bed. He wouldn't. As a matter of fact, the criteria of the Polish, that if you can't stand your liquor, you don't drink. And if you drink and you misbehave, you're not invited again. This sort of thing. You had to be able to hold your liquor.
What about his livelihood?
Oh, he just picked up anything he could. That's anything that they could make money in. And at the end, he, as I told you, when he had to come back, his father took him he learned how to make shoes. That's what he trained in. So at the end, just before my mother died, there was somebody we knew who had a shoemaker's place. And my father learned how to fix bicycles. And he knew how to he had a really wonderful hand for any detail work, striping and things like that. And friends of ours had a bicycle store. So Charlie, whenever he needed something done, I thought that's one thing he used to do. Because he could just do beautiful designs and everything, that he wanted. He had a lovely hand in writing too. So that's what he did. He bought this store, and he repaired shoes and repaired bicycles.
A bicycle shoe store?
Yeah.
That's hysterical.
And then also, there's somebody that wanted to have a laundry, pick up laundry for not cleaning, but cleaning. So they also gave him that little biscuit.
Well, how old were you at this point?
I was married, and he was in his 70s.
Wow.
He was in his 70s then. So that was pretty brave of him.
Great.
To do that. So that's what he did, and then he just made money, and then he always had friends. He wouldn't go out anywhere, but he had always had people coming to see him and stop in and spend the evening with him. He had a lot of And so did I. You know, it makes strange, but I used to have a lot of, not close friends, I never wanted that, I had some, but there was always somebody, I remember sitting at home, I loved to read, and I'd be upstairs in my bedroom reading, and I'd think to myself, oh, I hope nobody calls for me, I don't want to go out. And then I couldn't say no when they came. So,
And how old were you then?
from the time I can remember, all the time. And even, until I was married, really. And then we had different tastes in people. And then you move around, and I still kept contact with certain friends, but only by telephone, and then you sort of go away.
Yeah, it's not easy then, is it?
And when we lived in Cooksville, Mary Whelpdale, down the street, she and I became very close friends. She was I don't remember your mother's friend, Douglas and Elizabeth. He's a physicist, and he's very good. And Elizabeth, she worked in television, doing production and things like that. Where she grew up. Whelpdale.
So how did your father deal with my mom as she was getting older? Did they see each other regularly, or?
Oh yes, yeah. Well, yeah, they couldn't converse very well.
Because?
Well, he didn't speak English. He had the odd words, but he didn't really speak it well. Isn't that amazing? And yet he kept a business going.
That is amazing.
And but he always had people, like where he lived, the woman next door, the house next door to his little store, she was some sort of very involved in the politics there. She'd come in and do all sorts of things for him. It used to surprise me. He always had somebody coming in to give him a hand. He didn't ask for it. He just came and did these things. It was strange.
That's
he
amazing.
was a very charming man.
Joseph?
Boyas.
Boyas.
B-U-J-A-S. Yeah.
And so what about Barry? Did he have a relationship with Barry?
Well, he died. Yes. How old were they when he died? Well, no, he died. They were quite grown. Oh, well, yes, he liked them, and he thought, but he never knew how to act with children. He liked them, and he thought they were pretty nice, and he wanted to know about them. And he'd bring them a bicycle, things like that. And he used to come to visit every week, no matter how far, how you had to go. When we lived in Hamilton, he would come by bus to Toronto. We lived in Toronto, and we had lived in Hamilton, and he set up a little business there. And he stayed there when we had to move back to Toronto. So he'd take the bus to visit us in Toronto on Sunday. And then we'd come and visit him and take your other great-grandfather with us so that they could visit.
Okay, I want to ask you, these are just right from the book here.
Exactly.
Bedtime stories. Do you remember what bedtime stories either that you were read when you were little?
I was telling you, my mother, every night, she read a chapter from some of the Polish classics to all of us every night. And when I read all the time when I was at school, I started school. We came to Canada when I was 6 that fall. And I didn't go, in Poland you start school at 7. And my mother wanted me to stay home until I learned a bit of the language. And I learned just from other children. So that I started school when I was 7, and I could speak English, not very well. And so I was put into kindergarten because I spoke but not that well. And I only stayed there for about 6 months, and I was put into junior 1. And so I was really 7 before I really started school. And so each year I would skip a grade, and I think that's bad because I was 12 when I finished, going on 13.
Finish what?
Lower school, 8 grades.
Okay.
So I started school, and I went through 8 grades by the time I was 12. So, it was great because I did very well, but you miss certain things in there. You do.
Sure, I know.
You're not always grasping. But I remember that too when in grade 1. I always remember this song. The teacher always had me singing a song in front of the class because of my accent, I guess, and my voice. So I'd stand up and sing, what was it now? About a sailor coming back and watching him coming, watching for him. I can think of it. I can't think of it right now, but I can.
Okay, could you say something in Polish for me, maybe?
Of course. What would you like me to ask me a question and I'll answer it?
How curly is the dog's tail, and describe Jerry for me, please.
Ma taki ogon, śliczny ogon. I'm saying he has a beautiful tail. That ogon is tail. And I say I should say ona because, ona is.
And can you describe your 3 great-grandchildren for me in Polish?
Tak. I'm trying to think of how great-grandchildren would be. I wish I had my dictionary with me. Wnuczki, prawnuczki, mam 3. Jeden najmłodszy ma 6 lat, się nazywa Mitchell. Drugi ma 9 lat, się nazywa Kyle. I trzeci jest najstarszy, się nazywa Jason.
Nice, thank you.
Proszę bardzo, dziękuję.
So, we were talking last time about Stanley, your husband, my grandfather, whom I remember only through imagery that is so deep inside of my living my psyche.
He thought you were just the living end.
And I remember feeling very comfortable with him.
Yes.
And I feel very safe.
Yes.
And I remember his Old Spice aftershave in his
Yes.
medicine cabinet.
Yes.
And that he had fingers missing.
Yes, they were shot off when he was shot down with France.
And I remember being on his knee.
Yes.
I just remember being there and feeling very secure.
Yes.
So that's a really nice feeling to
It is.
have
It is.
from a grandfather.
Yes. And remembering that. Yes. It is.
Yes.
Yes.
When he came back from the war, when Mom was 2,
Yes. She had just turned 2 in April.
and what did he do then? Because I know that he was an illustrator and he had lots of an artistic bent.
Yes. Well, he used to do designs he worked for General Electric, and he worked in there, and he used to design their furnaces. As a matter of fact, I have a picture of him standing of something that he designed and they built. And so he did drawings of that kind, and he did plans, because I do remember, because when we went into business with one of them was Peter Hall, and they didn't know each other, and he had to send him a drawing of a pattern, and he thought your grandfather got very bored at that time. So and all the ends, he put little monkeys' tails and monkeys on this draft, and he sent it out to the design studio. I mean, it was an engineering design. And later on, when we met Peter, he says, "So you're the one." He said, "I remember getting that." He was the engineer that it was sent to at another firm. So anyway, that's the way. But he worked in that for a while, and he just got so bored, doing this, because it wasn't. I mean, it was design work and drawings and drafting, and he had always wanted to be an artist, and he was very good at it. But his parents said, "You can't make money at that," so they sent him to school to learn how to do drafting and things. But instead, he wanted to go to the Ontario College of Art. So he left after a short time and got a job in sales engineering. He was doing sales for engineering companies and anyone who designed things and that sort of. So that's what he did most of the time after that, until he went and worked for this one company, and he met John Dite. So that he got John his first job that he got in that field, and he was an engineer from Holland. He had come here from Holland. So John was looking for a job and he was having a hard time, so your grandfather got him in there. So they became fast friends. And then they decided that they should go out on their own and do this sort of work on their own. So another one, the one I was telling you that got the engineering with all the little monkey's tails hanging, or the monkeys hanging from this. Peter Hall was another friend that they met. So they decided to go into business together. They didn't have that much money, so Peter had a friend, Bill Allen, whose father owned a large development and contracting company and had set Bill up in his own little field. So Bill put up the money and they went into partnership. And they went into actually commercial air conditioning. So they used to design units for large places like a factory or a huge shopping plaza when they put those up. So they would design that, and that's why we moved back to Toronto from Hamilton, because your grandfather used to cover Hamilton for the company that he worked for. And we lived there, and then he covered, so then when they went into partnership, we moved back to Toronto so that he covered the Niagara Peninsula for him. But I think Peter had a nervous breakdown, that's what it was. So he came back to Toronto to take part in the company here. And they were doing very well, and then they overextended themselves. They were working hard for 5 years. That's a long time. They worked all the time. And were doing very well, but then they overextended themselves, and the creditors started coming in on them, and they just had to go into bankruptcy. And that's when, but of course, your grandfather was offered a job to go down to the States and cover an area for the company that one of the companies they represented, but he didn't want to move away. So he did have an opportunity because a friend of his wanted to develop in the States, so he offered to send the whole family down and back us so that we could find something done. But I think your grandfather was just too depressed by it.
Yeah, how old was he then?
He was only about, well, you see, we went into this business because he was young, and if anything happened, it wouldn't matter. But he was just 49 when he died, so he must have been about 47 then.
Yeah, that's hard.
It is.
And you work so hard.
Oh, yes, yeah.
And it doesn't come out.
Well, especially when it could have.
Yeah.
You know, that was the whole thing. It was a great, because even after they went into bankruptcy, people used to call him just to come and help them, you know, do this and that. Because he would, the other two would do the sales and the design work, but he was the one that would know how to apply this practically. You know, he'd go out and get it really all in place for the way it should be. So he was the one that they counted on to do that.
Yeah.
So that's too bad.
But generally speaking, throughout his life, he was robust and healthy, and I've heard very gregarious.
Well, he was. Oh yeah. You know, because I mean, he appeared that way, but he used to be. You know, and he'd had a pretty hard life. You know, when he was little, he was the youngest one, except for his younger sister. And as I was saying, his mother looked after the girls, and his father after the boys. So he was sort of like a lone wolf. And if it wasn't for his older brother, he wouldn't have had any attention at all. They fed him, but then he was on his own. So he was pretty tough when he got in there.
When Leon
And that's his oldest, yes.
and his wife
Helen.
were kind of like your parents. Did they come around a lot?
We always saw a great deal of him, yes.
And you saw a lot of his family when
Oh.
Mom was born.
Oh, yes, I mean, your grandfather never had very much to do with him at all, with his family. You know, just to come and sit. He was off somewhere. He loved to dance, he loved to paint. So he would do this on his own, but he had nothing in common with the rest of them. So, and then he was a kid brother, you know, with all these people, the kid brother, and his brother they were all working, and he was still at school, this sort of thing. So that when he had nothing to do with them, really. But it wasn't until he and I were married that we really started. And then they used to come over all the time, we used to see them all the time. And he got closer to them. But that was really the only time before that. And then we really didn't, as far as socializing with them outside, we didn't. They always came, they were there all the time. But we didn't, we never really become. Yes, he did get very close to him, I must say.
Who was his good friend that he would go out and golf with, for example? Because I heard he was a great fan of
everybody wanted to have him join him because he was good. Everyone, well, you see, as I say, he went his own way when he was a youngster. So he used to go and caddy. He loved golf. So he used to go and caddy and earn money that way for whatever he wanted to do to spend. So he became a really good golfer. Because he practiced, he loved it.
Yeah, even my dad said that I think they golfed together.
Yeah, oh yes, he used to go all the time. And he used to go with his older brother. Before that, he always had people that wanted him to, and people would ask him to come to tournaments with him to be their partners, because he was good. Yeah, he was a good golfer.
Now, you had Mom and then you had Barry.
Yes.
How old were they? How far apart were they?
2 years.
2 years.
3 years. No, 2 years. 3 years, no. Yes, because when your grandfather came home, your mother was 2. And Barry was born a year after. And really, I guess he wasn't really planned. It just happened because it would have been better if we had had some time to ourselves. Oh, and when he came home, this was a very strange to me because I had a place of my own, and then on Barry, your mother's birthday that year, we were supposed to. They were supposed to come. My sister-in-law Helen was supposed to come over, and we were going to have a birthday party for Diane. And I didn't hear from her, and I wondered what was. I knew I didn't have a telephone, and I knew something must be wrong. So I took Diane, and we walked up to their house. They lived about 2 miles away from where I lived in Toronto, which was nothing in Toronto, you just walked in. So I walked up there and I went in, and they had scarlet fever. So I was quarantined with them. At that time, anybody that was in contact with them, you would be quarantined. So they had a sign on the door, and so I was stuck there during that whole time. So I was stuck there up until the time your grandfather came back. I was still there. We were just.
Mom too?
Yeah. She didn't catch it, and I didn't catch it.
Well, that's a miracle.
I know. Well, that's the point. She had a very little bit, and I didn't get it at all. But I looked after them. You see, I was the only one there. Helen was ill. The 2 girls were ill, so I was caught in so I looked after them until they got better. And there was nothing else I could do. They wouldn't let me out. The inspectors used to come around, and the doctor would come around, and once you were there, you were stuck.
How'd you get any food?
Oh, well, her husband was allowed to go out to work. I don't know how that worked, but he was, so he'd bring everything home. Yeah. It was very strange. It was a strange, and this was April the 25th, and the war ended in June, and I knew that your grandfather, he wouldn't be released until the war was over, because they had released some, and then the war was so bad that they weren't releasing any prisoners. They used to exchange prisoners of war, but then they stopped that.
Okay, so he was in the German prisoner of war camp.
Yes, on the River Elbe in Leipzig.
Because I saw pictures, and then I've seen pictures of him in the prisoner of war camp.
You saw a picture that was taken. You
Yeah.
didn't see him in the prisoner of war camp.
No, of course not.
No, you saw the picture when he came home.
Right.
Because
He was pretty gaunt,
yes, well, they were starved.
pretty hollow.
They were starved, and when he came back, he didn't come directly back to Toronto. When the Russians were going to really, because they were on the Russian part. The River Elbe divided, the part that they were in was under the Russian army, and the part across the river was the Americans had reached that point. So what they did when they were there was nothing there. I mean, they were they were bombing every place, and the bombers were going over their prison camp, and they had a Red Cross on it, but it didn't stop them. So they would, they were all scampering all the time. And then when they heard the war had ended, they knew the Russians were on that side. So he and a couple of his comrades decided to go out on their own. They didn't wait to be repatriated. This wasn't going to be for them. So they took off on their own across the fields and to get across the river to the other side. So I don't know how many days they spent wandering across, and they were just scrounging with food, whatever they could get. And they did get across to the American side. And then the Americans kept them there, and then they sent them to London to hospital there because they had to be looked at. And everything that he had, when the pilots, any fighter pilots were shot down, they had agreed that nothing was going to be sent back to their families except private papers. Everything else they would just distribute amongst themselves, clothes, everything. So he had nothing to wear or anything except what he'd had on during a year and a half in prison camp. So they repatriated them, and he had to go. He was invited to have tea with the Queen, one of the ones invited. I mean, not personally, but to the tea, that she was holding. So he had to stay there and get a uniform made because he was an officer, so he couldn't just go in and be fitted out. He had to go to Bond Street and have a uniform made so that he could go and have tea with the Queen. So that delayed, and then of course he was in the hospital too. And then when he came back, he had to go to Sunnybrook Hospital for checkup, re-examination.
He received medals, a lot of medals.
I don't know.
You don't know?
No.
Whose medals then did you distribute?
My father's.
Your father's?
When he was in the war, in the First World War.
Oh,
Yes.
somebody has those medals.
He said he could pin them on the dog as far as he was concerned.
But didn't Granddad have anything for being shot down? Didn't they give him at least some sort of acknowledgement?
Yes, he did have. He was rescued. He was one of the people whose life was saved by a parachute, and he did have something because he was one of the few that were rescued.
Was he stuck in a tree?
Yeah. Yes, he did. His parachute got caught in a tree, and he was hanging there, and he was unconscious because he had been burned and his fingers had been shot off, so he was bleeding. So he was unconscious, and it was the French underground, because this was in France that he was shot down. The French underground rescued him, but he had bled so much and he was burned that they thought he'd die if they didn't get him to the hospital. So that's why they just left him at a German hospital, because he at least got treatment there.
Wow.
Yes, so I didn't know that he was alive until I got a note from some Red Cross worker had written to me. And this was about a month or more later. And I got the letter from, he couldn't write because his hands were bandaged. And then I was the one that got in touch with the Air Force to notify him, because they notified me that he was dead. So I got in touch with them and let them know so they could look after him, to get in. And then, not only that, but at that time there were so many airmen taken prisoner that they had different camps for Army, like prison camps, Navy. They're all separated. And the Air Force camps were just saturated. They didn't have room. So he was put into a transit camp, waiting for time for him to be able to transfer. So he was in transit camp, which had everybody there. So he was there for a year and a half. And they really had, and then he met they call him his mucker. They shared parcels. And that was the only way he survived.
What's a mucker?
That's what they call him, something that you muck with. You share, they gave them what they had to eat, but then we used to send them through the Red Cross. We'd send them parcels every month, and so they shared what they had in their parcels with whoever they were sharing with, so they would stretch further. Your grandfather said he learned how I used to send him, what was it called, in a tin, and he said we learned how to slice it so thinly that you wouldn't believe.
Oh.
But they try to keep active. They played soccer, try with whatever energy they had.
How long did it take for him to get home?
Well, about a month later, about a month after. Because
What was his full name?
Stanley Baransky. That's all.
That's all?
But his brother changed their name during the Depression when he wanted to get a job. So he changed it.
Leon.
No, his next brother, Leon, had been working long before, and he was with Bell Telephone for a long time. And he was their sort of supervisor, and at the end he used to train the other people on. No, it was his brother Sidney, the second one. He couldn't get a job. That was the only way he got a job. It's changed, so it just sort of petered down to that.
Because Stanley's parents stuck around for a while, right?
Well, his mother died. I never met her. She died before. I mean, we used to go out at school. He took me. No, he didn't really. No. I knew him at school because he used to do. He was at the other part of the school. He used to do all their artwork. Anything that was. He used to be there doing all the artwork on all the different places. So I knew of him, and then at the Polish club we met because his brother had him there. But I never really met his mother because she died before that.
So you don't know her name?
Yes, I know her name, and I know her. Jadwiga.
Oh, yeah.
She was yes.
Okay. And when did his father die?
He died, I guess, shortly after my father died. Or was it before my father died? About that same time.
But he grew to be...
In his 70s. Or 80s. Close to 80, yes.
And do you recall what he died of?
Just of old age, I guess. Yeah. Mm-hmm. I don't remember the exact... I don't know why I don't remember.
No, that's okay. That's okay. So, you reunited with Stanley.
Mm-hmm.
You had Mom and Uncle Barry.
Mm-hmm.
And where did you live?
Well, first of all, we lived with his brother. When he came back, there wasn't any. We tried to buy a house. We had the money to buy the house. And the law was at that time, because of the war, that if somebody was in your house, the one that you bought, and they could stay in it as long as they wanted. You couldn't take possession. Yes, because there was so little housing. When the war broke out, people lived together a great deal because of the Depression. So there wasn't any new housing built for a long time. And during wartime, in order even to put soldiers in, they had to build Quonset heights, all sorts of things to build. And when all the soldiers were coming back, they had to build these developments just for the soldiers. And the only way you get them is if you were a returnee, somebody coming back. So we lived with his brother and wife when he came back. And my apartment had gone. So Leon said, you must stay here until you find somewhere. So we tried to buy a house and just couldn't get possession. So then then my mother's friend, Mrs. Staniszewski, came and she said, I've just bought a house right near Hyde Park, and I want you to live on the second floor. She said, I have a very nice flat there, and I know you're looking for a place to come and live with me. We had our own. So we lived there until we were notified that we could have one of the housing that they had built. But we lived there for about a year. She was very nice. I liked her. So we had the upstairs was nice. I mean, we had 2 bedrooms, fireplace. It was one of these big houses just across from Hyde Park.
Nice.
That's where I lived when Barry was born. That's where we lived. That's where he was born.
Very nice. And so I know that you were very involved in the kids' schools, and you
Yes.
worked a lot in the community.
Yes.
And did you bring them up with any religion at all?
Uh, I taught them religion. I taught them, but no, I didn't, because your grandfather he wasn't an atheist. He was an agnostic. He just believed in something, but not one God, nothing. So he didn't. And I was a Catholic, but not. I hadn't practiced for a long time because I left the church when I was about 16. I was too disappointed in a lot of things. I believed in the Catholic religion, that I still believe in, but the church was just, I just was too disgusted with a lot of things. So I didn't really bring them up in a church. They did go to church, the Anglican church there, I took them there occasionally. And I had them baptized.
But you didn't have organized prayers before dinner or anything like that?
No.
And
they were involved in Boy Scouts and Girl Guides.
so they got some
A good
information
moral.
from different places.
Well, not only that, they taught, I taught them moral values the way I had in mine.
Mhm.
So it wasn't that they were.
This is getting back to the book's questions, and how are your child rearing attitudes for your children? What did you expect of them, and how did you raise them?
I raised them fairly well disciplined, and I read to them, and I felt that all their talents should be developed, no matter what. Even if I thought they should learn music, and Diane liked to dance, so I set her. When she was 7, I took her to ballet, and they were taught, and they both studied piano for about 7 years, and they read a great deal, and they were always read to. And we took them to classes and ballet classes, and I took part in all the school activities.
And when you had Mom and Barry on Hyde Park with Stanley, did you stay there for very long, or
Just about a year.
You moved out then?
We moved out to Etobicoke. And then we bought, after we'd been there for a while, we bought a house out in Cooksville. It was right across from an orchard. And it was really nice. When there were stables on the other side of the highway, and your mother used to go and ride horses. She loved horses, so she'd go over there. And she had one in particular that she looked after, and she rode the horse. And then she rode in a sulky at the exhibition during the Royal Winter Fair. So she'd go and groom the horse and look after him. And then she left because she was too busy in high school and so on. And she went back, and they had the horse destroyed. And she was just heartbroken.
Oh.
The one
I remember she loves my friend Flicka. And tell me, can you describe Mom and tell us about her character when she was growing up?
Oh yes. When she was little, she was so responsible and so intelligent. She was really grown up, I think, when she was born, in her attitude. Yeah. And when she went to kindergarten, they gave her somebody to look after, and she was just fun. And so she always did very well at school, but we never liked, how can I put it? We had, my in-laws, they had children, they was constantly bragging about them, so we never bragged because it was so, we got so bored with that. But she really did excellent work. And also, I liked her friends too. She had a lot of nice friends. And the group was there. When we lived in that area, they were all children all over, so they had a great time. Every family had 2 children, and birthday parties. When you had a birthday party, everybody attended.
Is that where you got to make your cake with the red dye number 4?
No, that was after later. No, I made.
We should make that.
Oh, it's delicious. I used to make cake, like I made a train cake, and I made a tent, all sorts of whatever they wanted. I'd make the design. And there were so many children, I just put a sheet down the floor, and they'd sit around. That's all you could fit in. They had a great childhood. I mean, when they were that.
Mom said it was very open and.
Oh, yes, it was a farm behind, and you know, they could do anything because we knew they were safe, everybody was around. If they went, well, even when they were little, like my friend Mary lived at the end of this street, sort of corner, so if she saw one of them going down there, she knew they were, so she'd stop them, and the same with Elizabeth. And Elizabeth was Barry's age, and Douglas was Diane's age, so that they were four very good friends. You know, they sort of grew up together. And they also, because both Douglas and Diane were sent to sort of a special school where they were advanced in everything. So they went to that, although Douglas was a year older than Diane. So he went, but they sort of went in the same way academically. And so they became very good friends. And I became very good friends with Mary. I mean, we helped each other. And, you know, as a matter of fact, she had her third child, Edward, and her husband, I always find this amusing because her husband was away somewhere. He used to travel, he was a salesman. And Murray, I don't know where, and she went into labor. So she didn't have anyone to leave the children, so I had to send her off in a cab while I looked after the children and got in touch with after I thought, my goodness, here she goes off all by herself.
I think that's all you need.
Oh, I know.
Kind of, just yourself.
I know. And she did. I got in touch with her husband, Murray, but he wasn't there. I mean, by the time I got in touch with him, she was on her way. She just couldn't wait anymore. And I couldn't leave because I had to be there for the children to come home from school. So it was so funny seeing Mary go off. And she was such a gentle, such a nice person.
So Mom went to school. I know she did extremely well in school. Mm-hmm. And she and Uncle Barry were close. Did they play a lot together?
Well, there were several. I mean, 3 years is a big difference, but they were. I mean, I remember. This is just to show you how responsible she was. We used to go have parties, you know, because it was all sort of a little circle, and you could right across the street. So we put the children to bed and go across and peek back, and that was fine. But I remember one time she was supposed to be napping, and Barry was in bed napping, and so I had to go across the street, next door, to get something. And I went there, and the next thing I know, here was Diane carrying Barry. She woke up and I wasn't there, so she wasn't going to leave him. So she carried him next door. She took him where she thought it was. She was only about 5 then. It was really cute. No, but she was very, very responsible. It wasn't until she was in her teens that she became a little irresponsible, and which is natural. But it was such a change in character that it was hard to get accustomed to that.
No,
and then
it is shocking. Adolescence is.
Oh yes,
really
and then
shocking.
she became very separate from everybody. I mean, she just didn't. Oh, she never confided in me from the time she was about 12. She did it to her brother. I mean, they all knew each other, but she didn't, because she was interested in a lot of things that maybe she thought I wouldn't approve of, and they wouldn't tell me. Neither one of them would ever tell me anything that was. I don't know what they thought. They just wouldn't tell me these things.
That people didn't.
No,
confide
they
so
tell
much
each
in
other.
parents.
No, but they never, it was strange. So they became sort of, once they reached about 12, 13, they become strangers.
Right, well, today you have books that show you, yes, your child has a different brain altogether right now.
Oh, that's true. I know, but you're not aware of that.
No, especially not then. I mean, they have actual images of
yes,
brain function of an adolescent that's completely different in how they're growing.
Yes, yes. Well, that was Dr. What's his name?
Spock?
Spock. No, that's what although I didn't go by his teachings, because everybody interpreted his teachings to say that you should let them do whatever they wanted, which isn't the way he meant it to be interpreted. But that's the way they did it. So the youngsters, some of them were just out of hand. And I just wouldn't tolerate it. I mean, I wasn't I just didn't let them. They had to toe the line.
I think we could stop right now and have a little rest.
Yes,
Think
good
A
idea.
little tea or
I
something.
must tell you this, when your father was going to meet me, your mother, he came and he said, you know, I visualized you as a big, tough, heavy woman.
Heavy, no,
No.
not another heavy woman.
No, you know, by thinking I was going to be a big, tough so-and-so. That's the impression he got from what Diane was telling him about me. So he was really quite surprised
Yeah.
when he
Well, some women are tall and they're short.
Yeah, you're right. Okay, that's enough, don't you think?
Oh my goodness.
Oh,